meeting on the planned Langston Boulevard update. We'll be holding a hybrid public meeting, which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7th, 2022. We have an in-person forum here tonight, as well as planning commissioners who are participating remotely. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided in the LRPC web pages, the county's event calendar, and the email notification sent to LRPC email subscribers. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our planning commissioners joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you're called upon. Turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed, and we will address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a moment. All right, so the Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active for two purposes. First, for participants who need technical assistance, and second, for other attendees who pose brief, clarifying questions to the larger audience. While these will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may address these comments as appropriate. Please note that the Teams chat should not be used for discussion or any inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment will need to do so at the end of the meeting, as the chat will not serve them. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. Also, we would like to remind everyone in the room to speak up slowly and clearly and point to the microphone to allow virtual participants to hear you. In addition, if you'd like to share your screen, please request permission from the LRPC chair, that would be me tonight, to do so. If planning commissioners are participating virtually, and you wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the course of the meeting, please turn your video feed on and raise your virtual hand in Teams. I, as well as staff, monitor the video feeds that are on as an indicator of who would like to speak. That's also important as to why you need to keep your video off, so that when we have somebody who wants to speak, we can see them and know that they are requesting to be heard. Additional notes for the members of the public who would like to provide feedback and comment. Unlike the Planning Commission's regular meetings, the LRPC agenda items are not public hearing, and therefore public comment is at the LRPC chair's discretion after committee discussion is concluded. You'll be called on at the end of the meeting to speak on tonight's agenda item. The speaking time allotted will depend on the number of speakers that we have this evening. We will call on speakers at the end of the meeting and ask staff to let us know if we have virtual attendees who would like to provide comment. Staff will acknowledge speakers in the team chat. Please indicate in the chat that you'd like to provide comment, and your name will be added to our list of speakers. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that's located in the meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You will be muted when your time has completed. As an alternative, public comment is available and may be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC webpage. Lastly, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county's website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. I am just going to ask really quickly if we have any planning commissioners who are joining us remotely today. I know Commissioner Peterson is joining us remotely. Are there any other planning commissioners? Okay, so Commissioner Peterson at this point. As an initial point, we'll go around the table. Oh.
Maybe somebody joining. Not sure that person wants.
We have one person joining by phone. Would you mind introducing yourself? Okay, never mind. All right, we're just going to go around the table and identify ourselves. Devansha Patel, Chair of the Planning Commission, and tonight's Chair of LRPC.
Hi, I'm Jim Lantelmi, Planning Commission, and I want to note that I'm also president of the Langston Boulevard Alliance, but I am here as a planning commissioner at the table.
Hi, everybody. Jennifer Smith with planning staff.
Hi, I'm Kelly Brown. I'm also with planning.
Eric Berkey, Planning Commission.
Karen Gamato, planning commission.
Thea Bagley, planning commission. Joe McIntyre, climate change, energy and environment commission.
Steve Robertson, Planning Commission.
Ryan Bauman with AECom, consultant helping the planning.
Natasha Alfonso with
And why don't we go on this side first?
Tim Hansen, a resident of Arlington.
Thank you.
Karen Roberts.
Brown.
Paul Holland, I'm the chair of the planning.
Emily Garrett, planning staff. Not this.
Ashley Smith, Impress Legal.
Pillsbury, resident of Arlington.
Jolie Pillsbury, resident.
I think Paul and I went to
But
high school. Forgot that part. Okay, wonderful. And then do we have any commission members that are online joining us or on virtually?
Hi,
Yes.
this is Tenley Peterson from the Planning Commission, and I have 3 little citizens also joining me tonight.
Thank you, Tony.
And this is Carolyn Haynes with the Forestry and Natural Resource Commission.
Anyone else?
Dick Ruff with the HLRB.
Thank you. I think that's it. Okay. So everyone, I hope you had a chance to read and review the agenda. So we've now kind of gone through the welcome and introductions, and I'm going to turn it over to Natasha and Ryan for the update.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen. Good. Right. Okay, so thank you, Madam Chair, and also to the members of the LRPC for once again inviting the staff team to provide an update on the planning study, and for inviting the representatives of the different commissions and advisory boards, and obviously the community forum reps to participate in this meeting. I think that's important to continue the dialogue. So joining me tonight are a number of staff departments, including CPHD, as you've seen in the room, with planning and housing, who are joining us virtually. We have staff from DPR and DES for transportation and stormwater as well. And as we presented earlier, Ryan Bauma, the project manager for AECom, who is the planning consultant conducting the study tonight. So the presentation will be divided into 2 parts. I'll begin with a very brief overview of the project timeline, where we are now, and how we went from the preliminary concept plan, or the PCP as we call it, to the draft area plan, which is what we're discussing tonight. Ryan will then follow with a few highlights of what's in the plan. And then after those brief presentations, I'm going to tee up the committee conversation or discussion by introducing the policies and the recommendations for each. That's all right with you, we'll get started. Let's make sure I can advance. Here we go. Okay, so it's okay. Yes, it's saying it's holding on. So as you know, we are get you back into the meeting. Let me, yeah. Because it's in presenter mode. Okay, let's try this again. Yes, okay. All right. So thank you for bearing with us. So as you know, we're in the process of developing and ultimately adopting a comprehensive high-level vision for the corridor that will guide both public and private investment long-term. We are currently completing phase 3 of a multi-phase planning study, which began in 2019. During phase 1, we completed the existing conditions analysis and historic and cultural resources survey, and this analysis informed the land use scenarios that were presented in the spring of 2021 at the beginning of phase 2. So feedback on those scenarios was used to develop the preliminary concept plan, or the PCP, as we refer to it, which was released last summer. The feedback on the PCP was then used to develop the area plan that again is before you tonight. This draft plan was released in June of this year in Main Street, as well as preliminary information on implementation. So with the plan, we launched an online engagement form, which is open on. Sure. So with the plan, we launched an online engagement form, which is open through July 30th of this month. We expect to prepare the request to I can. Yeah, let's do it. That's the mic. So. Sorry. Make sure how everything. Hold on. Sorry about that.
All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. Good to be with you tonight. And
Maybe.
Okay.
More than I can think of. Yeah, I mean, I think. Screen rather.
the actual file.
You should leave it and read.
Yeah, no substantive anything happened during that time that we lost whatever we did. And so now we are turning it over to Ryan, and Ryan is about to start now.
Yeah, I'm trying to connect. We lost internet.
Can somebody let us know if they can hear us?
Emily?
Can you hear us, Tenley?
Now we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, Michelle. We are just trying to queue up the presentation right now, so sorry for the delay.
You're still connected. No, I, but you're still connected. Well, I rejoined the meeting. From the room. That's hard. So I'm wondering if you can open the PowerPoint there and I'll just sit there. I'll use your laptop. It's not connecting on my end.
Probably the storm. Storm is late.
Let me,
Either one.
you and I would say that. Okay, so from there, the SharePoint.
No, yeah, I won't go there. Somebody.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
No, we have a copy of it. Oh, well, let's see. She's asking me to accept. I think I'm on. It's just the user one.
I guess.
Hey, we're gonna do this.
It's right now. It's on SharePoint, but I might be able to get in now. All right. Yeah, nothing. Okay, I'm in.
I should have found a special.
I'm in. So let me go back to sharing. Share my.
You want one?
No, just like Elizabeth was on.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, Ryan, just before you go, just for everybody, Planning Commissioner Elizabeth Guerin has joined us as well.
I have to use the desktop. I mean not the presentation.
That's fine.
You can maximize it. I think that is what caused it.
One more vote.
Sorry.
All right. I think that's gonna work. All right,
Okay.
we're gonna try this. So the vision that's been carried forward from the preliminary concept plan into the draft area is to boldly plan for people, power, place by 2050, resilience, renewable, and re-energized corridor in mind. So the draft area plan envisions sustainability and environmental resilience and equity as its foundation. That flows through each of the different planning elements we're going to be talking about over the next 2 meetings. One of the key ideas here is leveraging proximity to transit to achieve those sustainability, resilience, and equity goals, and to meet the housing needs of an increasingly diverse set of residents and household types. The demographics and equity being at that foundation is quite important. When you look at the larger Washington region, Arlington's population is less racially diverse, younger, and more affluent than that broader region. And within the county, Langston Boulevard has a lower percentage of residents of color, is more affluent, and has a slightly older than the county as a whole. So when starting the draft planning process, we wanted to include that commitment to advancing racial equity, using that equity lens to understand where the inequities exist, where we can improve things, where we can add the choice necessary, and evaluate the potential benefits and burdens of promoting that change and look at how those burdens are distributed. When you go along the corridor today, there are a variety of different conditions present. It is not the same thing from one end of the corridor. And we wanted to make sure that the draft plan reflected that. There are several locations, though, where you can feel that auto orientation, that auto forward built environment, which is one of the significant changes we would like to make over the next few years. Just by looking at the street, Langston Boulevard, from one end to the other, you can see a variety of different conditions, from almost an expressway condition in the east to very narrow roadways. And for pedestrians in particular, one of the most important constituent groups for us in this planning effort, there are a variety of conditions, but many of them very challenged. Now, we do have some examples to build on, like Westmoreland Street on the right, where there's a good example of a pedestrian-oriented environment that facilitates ground floor commercial and new residential dwellings. But on the left there, you can see those conditions that we're working with to try and change. The residential neighborhoods along the corridor are actually quite lovely, right? With the places that people live today are wonderful, tree lined, and there's lessons from those neighborhoods we want to bring onto that commercial corridor. Although there are some neighborhoods that have a lack of connectivity between them that we wanted to change, especially in Area 5. So part of the process was to map the barriers or the disconnects within the public network. There's a great series of public parks just off of the corridor already, but there was a lack of connectivity along the corridor and across it, preventing people from taking advantage of those existing resources. And of course, as you can move through it, and you can see that the significant amount of impervious coverage within the commercial property, certainly, and that causes several different types of challenge for our sustainability goals. Those same locations have very little tree canopy, and we wanted to make significant changes there. And it's going to take the development, the redevelopment of that property to make that happen. We were working with the staff to understand where the flood risk is along the corridor and how that tree canopy, or the lack thereof, and the presence of those impervious surfaces are exacerbating the flooding challenge. All right, it's asking me to do a few things here. And it's asking, it wants me to hold on a little bit again. So just a few moments, folks. We'll see if this reconnects. Think happy thoughts. Okay, it looks like it knocked this out. To try and reconnect.
Sure. We're going to try to open up SharePoint one.
You were, I'm like, I see you now. All right. Yeah, do you know where it is? No. Okay, so go to meetings all the way down to public. And then LRPC should be, you're in phase 3, right? LRPC right there, 725, and it should be the last one. The PowerPoint, that one. What should we do? We'll have to just take them to advance it. Do you need to see? I can on my phone. I can see.
Everyone in here. Just not, show it without it.
So
Like that.
share again.
Yep.
But just.
Then we can.
Go to Windows 6 and then pick that. Yeah, should be good.
Minimize that. Yep. Okay. Well, I think that might be what we go back to.
You're seeing
Just sharing the whole window now?
Yes, so you don't need. Just go down to the power.
Yeah, so if you're gonna go to that,
Just pull it up.
yep,
Okay.
and then go ahead and. Well, I don't
So-
know that we need to. Okay, there we go.
All right, are people in the virtual meeting seeing the slides?
Michelle, can you see the slides?
We are, yeah.
Thank you. Great, thanks.
All right. Catching up, okay. One of the important things to keep in mind, and one of the motivations for the entire planning effort, is that by right development, that process is not resulting in the changes necessary to see realized. So quite a bit, whether that's the lack of housing diversity or the fragmented streetscape or the continuation of the impervious surfaces, it's important for us to incentivize redevelopment outside of the by right process in order to see those goals realized. So in order to proactively plan for change, the area plan guides those improvements and the decision-making for new buildings, site improvements, and other infrastructure, and looks to incentivize development that can help transform Langston Boulevard into that walkable, sustainable urban Main Street environment that we're looking for. And to realize those county goals, affordable housing, biophilia, safety, transportation, public access, and racial equity. There are 9 different planning elements that have their own policies and recommendations associated with them. We're going to be focusing on the built environment component in this meeting, land use through historic and cultural resources. There are design principles and guidelines also included in the draft area plan. The idea there is to provide the kind of guidance for how to do the recommendations and how to achieve the development that's talked about in the principles. Those guidelines for the public realm and the built environment are set of recommendations for how to apply those design principles. I think with that, we've made it through the first part to kind of open things up.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And we were going to offer an opportunity, if you have any questions of what Ryan presented or what I shared tonight, we can do that, or we can skip and just go straight to policies. So
Yeah, let's go to the policies. And that
Okay.
way we can try to.
yes, we can make up some time. Yeah. All right. Thank you. All right. So as Ryan stated a number of times, the vision for the corridor itself is obviously to become a green Main Street of neighborhoods that are linked together, or that link businesses, mixed use activity nodes, housing and public spaces together. This requires a new planning framework, a new land use framework than the one that we currently have. And so the map that you see here really illustrates how development in the future should be concentrated in the mixed use activity hubs, 3 of which are existing today and 4 new ones that we've identified that are again connected by areas of lower intensity development, along with areas primarily or predominantly multifamily to expand opportunities for increasing multifamily housing along the corridor. So of the 3 existing activity hubs, which include Westmoreland, East Falls Church, Metro, and 5 Points, 2 are in the East Falls Church Neighborhood Center District, and 1 is in the Cherrydale Revitalization District. Where adopted plans and policies and implementation tools already exist to guide implementation in that area. So this corridor-wide planning framework that we're proposing here is further defined in the plan through a series of use mix maps for each of the neighborhood areas, which specifies specifically in each of those areas where we would like to see commercial, multifamily residential, or mixed-use development, and where public spaces and public facilities should be incorporated as part of new development or redevelopment of any of those neighborhoods. Okay, so before we introduce the policies, and we're going to now get into the various key planning elements under built environment, as we said in the next meeting, which is tentatively scheduled for September 5th, we're going to cover the public realm policies or key planning elements. So tonight we're going to focus on mainly economic vitality, housing, building form, public schools, and historic and cultural resources. So before introducing those, I just wanted to point out that what you see on the slides is a summarized, very distilled version of the policies. Obviously, in some cases we have over 20 policies for one specific element. So just wanted to note that for the discussion purposes, we've streamlined them so that we can capture, just the high level points that are important to convey. So for economic vitality, the policies here really focus on strengthening the commercial base that already exists along the corridor, which we know is successful. Very little to 0% vacancy rate along the corridor today. And the recommendation is really to concentrate development in the core areas that support commercial activity and jobs. This obviously can be achieved by expanding the residential uses and densities that are allowed today, which thereby increase the housing supply along the corridor, and also by designating public spaces that support social gathering, which is, again, supportive of the businesses that exist along the corridor. So with that, we can open it up to some discussion. I did provide in the slides, and maybe you got a chance to look at it, a sample of the use mix maps for each of the neighborhood areas. It just really helps to see that in some locations, we've actually identified ground floor priority areas. These are areas where we're indicating that the ground floor spaces should remain non-residential, and where spaces should be built as commercial ready, or spaces that can be occupied in the future by retail or retail equivalent uses when the market can deliver them. So these maps are there to show for each one of those neighborhood areas where those spaces are important. We further defined them or designated the 2 types, which are the gold and the blue. And the difference between the 2 obviously is that, on Gold Street frontages, those ground floor spaces would be required or should be designed to provide interior as well as exterior features that support retail and retail equivalent uses, whereas in blue street frontages, only exterior features are required. And so anywhere else along the corridor or and also in residential districts, like the multifamily residential district, we do allow for retail uses on the ground floor, so we do allow for mixed use in those areas as well. But in those cases, the retail or the ground floor space is not required to be designed to provide the interior or the exterior spaces. It's optional. And should retail uses be provided along the ground floor in those areas in between the activity hubs, what we ask is that the spaces are designed to incorporate design elements that create active street frontages and encourage pedestrian and multimodal mobility along.
So what we're going to do now is when you look at your agenda, you'll see under item number 6, under the B subsection, you see a bullet point that says built environment policies and associated design guidelines. There are 5 bullets under that. What we've decided to do is, because there's so much material here, Natasha's going to present one of the bullets, and then we're going to provide an opportunity for everyone to ask them questions with regard to what they've just heard. We understand that some bullets may produce very little questions, and some of them will be areas that we want to have more discussion on. So unlike meetings that you attend with me typically that include round robin, this is actually just popcorn. Whoever would like to go can ask the question. Anybody have a question on this particular element? Jim?
Yeah, on retail, what I'm a bit concerned about is that the standards for retail on a particular nodes, but between nodes, but at the nodes themselves are a little too loose. That we could end up having residential only buildings because of the allowance of ground floor equivalents. That the building itself would be completely residential and they would then use the ground floor for the residential gym, bike room, things like that. My fear is that at the main activity node, that's going to be dead. Even though people walking by will see activity and their eyes on the street, which is good, it's still, you have to walk by because members of the public will never be able to use it because it's for the building only. So it's essentially a little gated community right there at our most active areas. That's something I think we should be looking at.
Yeah, I would concur with Jim on that issue as well. Any other thought?
I mean, is that something that we could legally require? That type of use?
Plans, we try to provide a little bit of flexibility because in the areas where we have required it in the past, we've seen that there's been vacancy. It's been built, and it's been vacant for a very long time. And I think we want to avoid that here on the corridor. As I said, when we started, there's 100% occupancy rate.
Yeah.
It's not vacant. It's a successful corridor. I think that for the concern that you have, that we might end up getting residential type uses that are, certainly we're advocating or recommending that no residential uses are allowed on the ground floor. It has to be non-residential, but for those types of auxiliary uses, let's say that are part of a residential building, I think those things can be further explored or defined as we go through the site plan processes in each one of these sites, because we could possibly look for designing the ground floor space to be able to move those spaces in a way that still creates activity along the street.
I think one issue that now I'm piggybacking off your point here, I think that what you're saying makes it different, right? So if we are concerned about how we required that or made some preference in other spaces, how does that look differently than Langston? And then I think the other problem when we think about, well, even looking at that, there are some spaces where it's not been successful on the ground level, right? Where Gaijin used to be, like that place is just completely empty on the ground level. I don't think there's anything left. Maybe Chase Bank, Ginger, maybe you know, but there's really nothing. Oh, great, yeah.
This is Chris Jones. Can I chime in here?
Hang on one second, okay? Just 1 second, because I want to get an answer to this question.
Sure.
Yes. Happening on Langston, what are we thinking about what's happening versus where these concerns may have been in other parts?
Sure. I think we'll have to go back and look at that and see if we can provide additional guidance, but I don't know, Jen, did you want to jump in and say something?
To respond to Eric's point, I mean, the plan is a guide, it's policy, it's not regulatory.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to address that. And to the point about how are we either aligning with or deviating from the retail plan that is applicable countywide.
Yeah.
I think we want to be as true to that, in another corridor, mixed use corridor. And to Jim's point about in the mixed use nodes, that's why we've intentionally said we've got ground floor priority areas. So we get mixed use in those areas. But we know that some uses that are ancillary to retail buildings can qualify for retail equivalent, but there's other uses that bring patrons into a building that are not, from upstairs, like medical offices or childcare that also count as retail equivalent. So I think we understand that we want to be able to drive activity and not have dead space, even if it looks like a shop front. So I think that that's some feedback that we can take back and see if there's any way that we can clarify our intent here is when we're looking at site plans in those locations, we're not looking to populate all of these ground floor priority areas with the ancillary uses.
Available.
Now, that means that there may be some of those instances that we can look at on a case-by-case basis, but we can set the tone here that we're trying to have, retail or again, that customer interface.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. The concern I have is because we have very few retail vacancies in the car. Extremely successful, there's huge demand for retail space. That doesn't mean that a property owner will want to accommodate that simply because it might be simpler and easier to just build a single-use building with those equivalents at the bottom that you just I don't have to worry about renting this out.
Well, so there are some places in where we have retail today that we are open to a residential building. But in these activity areas, which are really at our key intersections, that's where we're saying, we're setting the standard by policy to say that we want to maintain or achieve mixed use.
And we want to make sure the maps really clearly reflect.
Right, so we've got Cynthia Hilton from FAC, who also has a question.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I am participating as from FAC, but I'm also a resident of Cherrydale, and I just have to, and I see on your map that is displayed that you're not displaying the entire length of this project. But the statement has been made several times that there's no retail vacancies along here, and I just want to put on everyone's radar that there is a section right in Main Street, Cherrydale, that the businesses are failing and failing and failing. A new one we just had in this stretch of road. It's kind of by the Safeway down there because there's no parking. So just to put that on your radar that there is an area of Langston Boulevard that does not have the successful story that we're all hoping for. And the community here thinks it's attributed to no parking, and the little bit of parking they have is metered, and which no one parks in the meters. So thank you.
Thank you. Nia.
So if a private commercial establishment now is on a site that redevelops, does that then, typically what has happened in other parts is that if they have the opportunity to go back in, it's a much higher rate and they can't survive that. So if we already have a thriving commercial corridor, how is that going to balance so that we don't destroy the thriving commercial corridor? Trying to get more people. Curious.
So that's been a conversation topic throughout the entire planning process, because there's, in the desire to go from commercial only uses to commercial and residential, there's the discussion of you'd have to change the building and who can come back in. There have been at different times people have suggested, is there some kind of rule that can be put into the plan to legislate that process? And that's a very difficult thing in an area plan. By requiring the space to be built to allow for the uses, that was step one, making sure that we didn't just have the situation that Jim mentioned, where it'd just be easier to do a single use building that completely precluded those businesses. So step one was to make sure that we had spaces that could accommodate. And then when it comes to the rent or the lease rate for that space, that's not really something that the discussion has been, that that's not something that the area plan can really limit. They can't regulate. I think it's a function of broader discussions throughout the county for how the affordability of retail space is maintained. I think we've also talked at some points, there's different property owners who were very interested in maintaining certain businesses. So it's not a foregone conclusion that businesses would be completely displaced. Also probably not the idea that always be the same lease rate in the future as there is.
Need to consider
That topic has come up several times.
it's a concern of mine. If they tried to get back in, it wouldn't be a great.
Nia,
Speak up.
and everybody, if we could just speak up because they're not picking us up.
One of the other things that has come up in those conversations is the idea that the change along this corridor, while some may want to see it happen overnight, it will be very incremental over time. And so the idea that all of the existing space would somehow go away and new space would come in very quickly, it would be a slow incremental evolution over time. And that's going to allow for lots of the businesses that we see today to evolve in their own way with the corridor. So the pace of change is an important thing to keep it not be fast.
I think Eric, you have a.
Well, I really appreciate that. I've had that concern along Columbia Pike about a lot of our legacy businesses. It's this question, right? Like, how much does government sort of get involved, right? We can't really require, businesses to be able to come back. And, there's this concern about incentivizing, redevelopment, which may push out some of these businesses. But I do agree, like it took 30 years for corridors along the metro to fully develop, and this is not going to happen overnight. So I think for us to get the environment that we want, we need to do much more assertively and thoughtfully about. Don't have anything really like we do on the housing side. So I think it's a compelling conversation that doesn't necessarily fit cleanly.
One thing we should all keep in mind when we're looking at this plan is compare it to if we don't have the plan, what will happen? And we're seeing our turnover in our legacy businesses anyway, because a lot of them are individually owned, and we have people retiring, people wanting to move on. So that's going to happen anyway. We're having that turnover will happen anyway. Is that correct?
Yes.
Staff. We're still going to be having, we'll lose a certain number of our retail staff anyway. And development will happen anyway. It's just we won't be able to direct it the way we would like to if there's a plan.
So will this just be for
A little
element that comes in, or will it be for, not for buy right?
No. It gives an incentive that we don't have to do by right.
Let's hold on one second while we try to get back into the meeting. Now we're back? Are we back? Elizabeth, can you hear us? Michelle, can you hear us?
You're back.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we did not discuss anything substantive when we were kicked out. And I think Ginger had a question. I think you're here as a commission.
No.
Okay, never mind, Ginger. You're not allowed to. You're trying to sneak in.
Still have comments at the end.
Okay, you'll have a comment. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it just, again, recognize that concern of, and it probably is a countywide policy of how to actually encourage small local businesses
I mean, that's the broader issue.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd raise is having developers think about, kind of future-proofing some of their development. I'm thinking particularly in terms of parking and underground parking, is designing it in ways that hopefully fewer people will be having cars and they'll have empty spaces. So what do they do there? And that might be another excellent opportunity to provide space for small businesses, catering, dishwashing to do, carry out containers and also probably entertainment. You can probably a lot of things that could be done. But I think it requires a little bit of forethought in the development of the building to design so it's easier to repurpose those type spaces.
I think the concern for me is in this spaces when we talk about these small businesses, and I think Eric brought up the point around Columbia Pike in conjunction with what you were saying. I think about Clarendon as well. I mean, we have essentially obliterated all of the businesses that, we saw an influx of people coming to Arlington in the 60s, was it? And all of those businesses are gone. And there's places along Langston that look like that still. And so, I think you're right on here, Mia, about this conversation. I think it does go hand in hand with a lot of the concerns the Planning Commission has been raising around affordability of housing that we need to be thinking about, or the county needs to be thinking about ways to incentivize small legacy businesses, to use your term, Eric, legacy businesses who are, in this space when we're thinking about racially diverse and equitable options for us. How do we make sure that we are helping that, right? And so maybe we can take that back in some way. Certainly it's outside the plan, like Jim is saying, it's not a plan-oriented thing, but we can see what the outcome will be because we can look so closely to Clarendon and to Columbia Pike and see what could likely would happen, right? Yes, ma'am.
Would it be possible in any way to, I know for HubZones, for example, there are incentives for people to come in to start businesses there but Langston Boulevard is obviously a place that's very wealthy. So what could we do? I mean, going along with these questions, is there a mechanism that could be sort of HubZone type that could be implemented somehow for businesses that are starting off, or I don't know, what could be
That's something that we can go back and research, see what opportunities there are. I know that the plan mentions in one of the policies to maybe look at some kind of revitalization program for commercial businesses, especially for the small ones that maybe just need to renovate or improve, that they don't have a tool like that today that they could possibly use. So maybe there's something like that in the future. I think the other thing we're trying to do with the plan is to address parking. And I know we have different opinions. Some people say, let's get rid of it. Others say, never get rid of it. It's going to stay with us for a very long time. And at the end of the day, parking is going to have to, it's going to be an evolution. It's going to change eventually. It's going to transform. We're going to start using it less, the cars, but for a very long time, we're probably going to need to incorporate it in some way or another. And I think the plan recognizes that part of the challenges that the businesses have today, and I think to the point of the lady who mentioned in Cherrydale, right? That there seems to be a lack of parking and some of the businesses are failing because of that. The plan recognizes that there needs to be a sort of different types of parking, different formats of parking. Some people are better, they prefer the above ground. Others, would like to see it more underground. It doesn't matter what type it is, but there has to be a good balance. And I think for the small businesses, what we found when we did our analysis of the parking sort of inventory in the commercial and multifamily areas is that it's really all over the place. In some areas that there is no parking, some businesses have zero parking. Others are overparked beyond what's required by the code. And some are somewhere in between. They're relying on on-street parking and so on. But what we did find is that in general, in those commercial establishments, there was sufficient parking. It's just that the access was difficult. It wasn't visible. Most people experience it like a frustrating thing to find. And I think one of the things that the plan addresses or recommends is that as businesses, whether they renovate or redevelop or not, is that they try to look at ways to share parking, especially share access, because that's our biggest hurdle, is not being able to share access, between four contiguous lots. That makes just the parking a little bit more accessible.
Elizabeth, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm learning so much. My question has to do, I wasn't going to raise this about legacy businesses, but I do know this is something we've come up against over the last 10, 15 years, seeing beloved small businesses leave, but also the issue of, and I'm not clear on this, if we're proposing to change some of the zoning so that some of those businesses that are on Langston Boulevard now would perhaps have a hard time relocating there if they had to leave and then come back, like the auto repair. And this is because we ran into this when we were looking at 4 Mile Run, and we initially thought about removing the light industrial. And it turns out some people have done some studies and said that's the sort of thing communities end up regretting later. So I guess I just want us to be, as we're looking so thoughtfully at these different neighborhoods and how, whether we want to incentivize businesses to stay or otherwise, I think that Langston Boulevard is a little bit like Columbia Pike in that if you do need to get your car fixed or you need an emissions check, those are the sort of places you can go. I know I have a friend that was the only place he could find affordable small space for a couple of startups that he has. So I want to keep that in mind as well. And I know the Langston Boulevard team has put a lot of thought into this, so they probably are thinking about this as well. But I just wanted to align myself with that sort of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so last couple questions on this, Jim, and then.
I also read through it, and yes, we do have more flexibility on parking in the plan. I want to make it sure that our parking stuff is really crystal clear that this is a different corridor, at least in areas 2, 3, and 4. That what works along the metro corridors won't really work here. And we have example both in Cherrydale, which is outside of this plan, by the way, make sure people understand it's not part of this. And Columbia Pike, where businesses just didn't have the right amount of parking. And we have a lot of vacancies there in corridors that are really high demand. So that flexibility has to be really front and center, that it's okay here to not have underground parking as the first choice for a number of reasons. But just recognition in the coming that this will remain to a certain extent auto-oriented. We're trying to shift that, and that's absolutely the right way to go, but we have to keep that ability for people to drive and park, because just the nature of the corridor and what's north of it is totally auto-oriented.
Okay. Yes, so really quickly, in terms of going back to just businesses, in addition to legacy businesses, I'm wondering if there could be an opportunity to work with the Arlington Economic Development Center where they have, it's an incubator, and perhaps there could be a program that if you start your startup or your small business, that there's some sort of pipeline that you could, I don't know, some sort of affordable business that we're retail space, right?
Okay, ma'am, want to move on to the next one?
Yes, so I think we're going to try to share the slides again. And otherwise, it'll just be verbal. So a couple more slides forward. Keep going, yeah. One more. One more, yeah. And the next one, sorry. All right. Thank you, Kelly. All right, so we're going to focus on housing now. It's visible, right?
Everybody can see the tiny little thumbnail slide.
Yes.
Okay. All right, and hopefully when I articulate on the screen there, but the policies on housing in the plan really focus on, again, increasing housing choices and supply, particularly committed affordable units. The primary recommendation is to encourage or concentrate residential development in the core by allowing residential in commercial areas, which we know is not allowed today, and by increasing densities throughout to increase the supply of housing, particularly multifamily. And I know we've said that a couple of times, but that is the key. The plan sets policies for increasing committed affordable units, which are units that are affordable to households earning up to 60% of the area median income. This can be achieved a number of ways, including redevelopment and infill of sites that have existing CAFs on them that are through renegotiated agreements to extend the terms of those existing CAFs along the corridor, through the conversion of existing marks to CAFs. And as we know, marks are pretty vulnerable. Many are in aging buildings that at some point may be renovated or redeveloped. And even if that may take a long time or it happens over a number of years, in both cases, changing those units will lead to rents increasing and no longer being affordable to those households. And then the last, another way is by incorporating new units on historic sites that are designated for full or partial preservation. So lastly, the plan establishes a policy to accommodate renovation of those aging residential buildings in order to sustain those marks, at least for the period of until the property owners choose to redevelop or take advantage of the options that are available under the plan. So with that, we have a couple of maps. Kelly, if we can, sorry, just we can scroll through them. They're here. It just provides some context of what's existing along the corridor. This is the housing types and then the marks and CAFs along the corridor. And then one more is just sort of the sort of the breakdown of the multifamily units along the corridor, like which are apartments versus which are condos. So if we need to refer to that, we're up here.
All right, questions. This is a hot button topic, I'm sure. I got to go to my friend Nia here.
In the more highly developed corridors of the county, we struggle when developments come in with the site contribution or the cash contribution or on-site units, and it sometimes seems to be a losing battle to get on-site units. Now, at least up until now, historically, from what I've seen in the county, maybe not on Langston, but the developments that come in usually are market rate. We've seen that on Columbia Pike. And my concern is how we're planning, especially if we're talking about equity. Equity is not going to be achieved unless there's a lot more affordability. It's not going to happen. So my concern with some of this is that we haven't been able to achieve this in places in the county. So what makes us think that we can here, or what is it about this that is going to enable us to achieve it better? Because my concern is that they're still going to have, at the end of the day, we can make a cash contribution by and wall. That is an important component for the affordable housing program within the county. It doesn't serve the purpose of getting more affordable units in that corridor to achieve. Right.
Okay.
So I have a question. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Karen and then Eric.
Actually.
Well, I want to tag on to what Nia was saying with a question. So, so the plan contemplates that there could be approximately, what do I see here? We could get to 2,400 more CAFs. I think it's more CAFs, right? Or maybe new CAFs by 2075. Can you just walk us through like how got to that number? Obviously, folks are flagging that and saying, "Whoa, that's slightly less than the Affordable Housing Master Plan 500 by 2040." So, can you sort of walk us through that?
Sure. Well, it was a long process to get to that number, primarily because, as you know, we've changed the heights a number of times from the beginning of the process when we did the scenario analysis, and then through the PCP and now through the area plan. So we've been through the use of a land use model that our consultant prepared for the corridor. We tested pretty much every site along the corridor in the core areas where we're showing change. We tested the sites that we thought had the most opportunity for change, meaning that either they were ready for redevelopment, they had ample room to provide infill, and really tried to test each of those sites to see what could fit. We tested it a number of different ways. We looked at parking above ground, which is a very conservative approach, meaning obviously if you put parking above ground, you get less units, right? If you put parking below ground, you have more developable area. And so we tested it that way too. And basically, I after putting all those numbers in for each one of those sites that we tested and looked at it along the whole entire corridor, we came up with a number that we thought was reasonable based on what we tested on those sites. And then we broke that out based on when we thought that development could come online. Some sites we knew are ready to move forward. They've already contacted staff, you know, with ideas of how they want to see infill and even redevelopment. There are a few of them, and you know, they're sort of spread out very across the whole entire corridor, so it's not like it's in one concentrated area. But it does tell us, it gives us an indication of when those projects might come online. So that's why you see the spread happening anywhere between now and 2075. And so then a portion of those units at the very beginning, when we looked at this sort of land use model at the very beginning, when we were preparing the preliminary concept plan, we weren't sure yet what the implementation tools were going to be, both for the GLUB and for the zoning. So for that calculation, we applied a general 10% of new development. And we did that also for the draft area plan that you have in front of you. Obviously, in the difference between the PCP and the draft plan is there was a little slight increase, and that's because we went back and added a few areas where there's additional height. Those numbers we're still looking at, you know, very carefully. And Jen can speak a little bit more to that. We've done a more deep dive analysis, let's say, of those sites that we've identified are ready for redevelopment and where we've shown additional height to test different things, certainly applying the sort of the tools that we have in mind at the moment. And so those numbers might change a little bit, but that is how we got to this very.
And if for that number to go up, in order for there would have to be more of those developments would have to be significantly affordable, 100% of that building, rather than just a portion of it. Or the heights would have to go up in order to have that overall number go up and the percentage go up. That, you know, so that's the other balancing act. Get the unit count up, that comes with other challenges.
And just want to clarify, so you estimated about 10% of the new units to come online.
And then there were other
Which
properties.
is a high percentage, sorry.
Sure.
It's a high percentage compared to what we know, you know, from projects that come online, and to your point. So we're going to be looking at those tools a little bit more closely.
And there were other projects, or other portions of the corridor that were owned by affordable housing, something along the higher percentage.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. And 100%.
So it's not just 10%, it's 10% plus 100% of certain.
Yes. So just a couple of additional points, and you said one thing that I was going to mention, that we do have a couple of properties along the corridor that are in nonprofit affordable housing ownership hands. And so, you know, when we've talked to them and we're looking at opportunities where they can either infill or redevelop, and we're making some assumptions there, but that those would continue to remain nonprofit owned sites, and we would be able to achieve, you know, a higher degree, a higher percentage of units as affordable units, hopefully up to, you know, potentially 100%. So that went into some of the factors. And, you know, will properties change hands? Will more sites come into nonprofit? We can all look at the crystal and, you know, make a decision about that piece of it. But I do think too, Commissioner Bagley's comment about the tools, we are working in a system where we are trying to rely on the incentive-based zoning, you know, mechanism that we have here. We are looking to use the site plan tool for, by and large, most of the development under this plan. And we know that through the site plan process that we have the affordable housing ordinance that applies. So we expect that projects would contribute as part of their base density. And while they have options for on-site units, off-site units, or cash contributions, most projects are providing cash contributions. And so we can't guarantee that those dollars come back in terms of units on Langston Boulevard. There's certainly opportunities to do that, and those dollars could certainly help boost at some of those nonprofit-owned sites. But we do think that there's additional development within the height limits that we are providing that would give us an ability to work with property owners under additional density, under bonus density, and to be able to negotiate for some of those for on-site units. So that's the mechanism that we think that we're going to be using to reach and strive for what was identified in the 2015 master plan.
So Karen, Joan, Jim.
I just really want to associate this also with the comment that Nia and Eric have made. This is something that's really important to me. And I could easily see it become more of a clarity with businesses and people who were able to afford it are not going to have the space there. And also, just in general, low affordable housing is so hard to come by. And as we have all said, usually developers do the cash contribution. And so I think there has to be a better way to incentivize so that we do have those affordable units within the buildings.
Yeah, I think, my actual concern is that, much of the plan looks like it's talking about total redevelopment over, particularly there's a lot of market rate affordable housing there. And another approach is trying to work with those to, you talk about, helping them improve energy efficiency in the kind of near term, and then they redevelop, as opposed to looking at it as preserving the existing buildings from an environmental carbon footprint standpoint. Adaptive reuse of existing buildings is by far the best way to go. And that should be kind of a prioritizing. And it does, another thing is many of those actually have a good bit of open space and tree canopy coverage, which according to kind of the redevelopment plans, most of that would go away. And that, is a loss of tree canopy open spaces through the corridor rather than actually an expansion of it. So I think, it doesn't mean that there are opportunities to expand them. They can infill on parking spaces, as you had other things maybe going up and on the structure of the building. The other opportunity here is that there's a lot of money out there for renovation, for energy efficiency, shifting to electrification, and that that is a good carrot for the owners of that to, and actually then will guarantee that those apartments stay as affordable housing, whether it's, so it becomes committed affordable housing for certain, and a good portion of time in the future. So I think that should be, a key strategy for developing from a whole range of different sustainability perspectives, as well as preserving what we already have.
Yeah, see that map up there? It's one end to the other. It's 5 different areas that's divided into. Our goal is roughly 2,500 affordable units in there. Note that areas 1, East Falls Church, and area 4, Cherrydale, are not part of this plan. Both of those areas have significant properties that could be redeveloped and would be a great place for affordable housing. So our goal will simply not be met by this plan as it's being passed, just because we have 2/5 of the corridor that are outside the plan, which means we really have to revisit those area plans and update them so that we can get from those areas what we need, especially East Falls Church, which is metro oriented. So, this is to advocate that our work plan going forward will start including those 2 areas for updates, not a complete revamp, but for updates, so that we can get the affordable housing, because the only way we'll meet the goal is by including those other 2 areas. The other thing I want to raise is that we have within the corridor a surprising number of condos that are affordable ownership condominiums. They're surprisingly low priced and affordable. A lot of them, however, have real problems because they're very old buildings that are coming up for renewal. And whether those owners can afford to do that is a real question. Within those buildings are a number of rental units that the owners are renting out, and those may not be inventoried as marks on the county's inventory. I think it's important that we recognize that they are there. They do provide great resource. Second, there has to be making an acknowledgement that there has to be some way to be able to support these entities, these buildings. Either to help them redevelop, that they can stay affordable in some way or another, or simply renovate that they can remain in place. I don't know how to do that. I think we need to explore that. It should be recognized somewhere in the plan, though, that they do exist up and down the corridor. And it's all along the corridor. It isn't just one or two, concentrated in one or two spots. I think we really do need to recognize that.
So I just wanted to say one thing about, I think that sometimes the frustration of the planning commission is that we are operating within a confined set of options. I think that what we think is that, we have 3 options with regard to affordable housing. And despite our changes to the zoning ordinance, we continue to operate within this very narrow lens. And it's time to open up that lens, because we need to understand that what's happening is like the 3 of the projects that have come before us recently have had 0 committed affordable housing on site. Then they hear from us, you have 0 committed affordable housing on site. That's not okay. Why do we keep doing that? You see every applicant before us. It's not an acceptable way for us to be doing business in Arlington. You've got to change your culture. We keep saying the same thing over and over again. I think the issue is now for us to try to think about ways that, sure, legislatively, regulatory confines aside, we have to think about Langston Boulevard as this huge plans, huge opportunity. It's time to be a little bit more innovative with how we let developers approach this space as it pertains to affordable housing. And I think that one of the confines that we don't discuss enough is we allow a developer, whomever it is, who has the benefit of the historical benefit of owning multiple properties in Arlington. We can talk about that historical benefit, but we'll maybe for another day. But they have the historical benefit of being able to own multiple properties. So all they're doing is parlaying one for the other, right? And it's not ultimately achieving what we have happen in our community, which is to make sure that we live in a diverse and inclusive space, and that all of our spaces look like that. So I think it's time for us to really get back to the drawing board and think about not just bonus density, not just this parlay, right? It's really thinking about what more can we be asking of people who are in the financial positions to be able to understand and do, because it's right. It's right, right? And I don't know, that's changing the hearts and minds of people, but we have good developers here in Arlington. I think that they would come on board if they felt that pressure from us a little bit more acutely. Yes.
Yeah, I know that staff is in a
hard spot.
Very.
Yeah.
Time and time again, we get the project coming in. It comes in with bonus density, supposedly so that we could get 1 or 2 more units. And then again, the whole thing is market rate. So it's unaffordable for most to begin with. And I would hate to see us in Langston Boulevard do what we've done accidentally or however down on Columbia Pike, where we have let a lot of folks who, added great diversity and wonderfulness down there, and they just couldn't afford it anymore.
But isn't the concern even more problematic? Because right now we're talking about a corridor, as our first couple of slides said, is highly affluent, right?
Exactly. So I just, and I know staff is in an unenviable position with this. I know that in your own little heart, you probably want to do differently, but you're confined by the way this is. But I just want to make sure that what we're laying out here is not, we don't wind up with another corridor like the RV corridor, which again is totally unaffordable.
Aaron, and then Aaron.
Just a quick question. Could you remind me if you guys have any information about the senior affordable housing along the plan? Yes.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about the public facilities policy, but no, it related to housing, we do mention that obviously public sites that are currently owned by the county, are sites that have the opportunity to introduce, whether it's senior or just general affordable housing. So we do mention that as a goal.
So then I'll wait for that.
Yeah.
And Ginger kind of reminded me, it's not the whole corridor that's.
Corridor itself isn't.
Right.
No, it's
Not affordable, let's say super affluent, not the whole corridor.
No,
It's not super affluent,
It's
thank
the
you.
areas north
Yes.
and south of the port.
Yeah, yes, yes,
Single family neighborhood.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you mentioned ideas. We have to come up with ideas.
that's right. But my point remains.
But Commissioner Gearin has mentioned one thing, can we explore something like mortgages that give better lower rates because you don't need a car because you're, let's say, in East Falls Church or you're in North Highlands. Those people don't have to have a car. Thus, that frees up money to pay for, so you don't have, so the 30%, well, maybe they can go to 35 or 40 because they don't have a car. And they can get a subsidized rate. And that's something that I'm not sure it's really been explored properly. They can go into Fannie and Freddie, people like that. But nonetheless, we're a big county for these sort of things. Maybe that's something we could start exploring. All those, those Fannie and Freddie are here in metro area, might have some.
Personal hospital. All right, you were able to? Looks like we're back in. Okay.
Can everybody hear us?
You're back.
Thank you.
So,
Okay, so Nia stopped, and now we're gonna start with Nia again.
okay. It's me again. I just have a question. So the affordable residences, condos that are, in the target areas here, when they renovate, what measure is in place so that the poor people who are currently there and because renovation costs a lot of money. And
Right.
if people come in and start throwing money around, they expect big return for that. So, monthly fees, something's gonna go up somewhere
These are
for that.
excellent questions, and that's the type of thing we're gonna have to sit down and figure these things out. If we want to preserve these affordable ownership units, we should figure some new programs. Absolutely.
Eric.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
Very quick. Tasha, this is probably you. So in the recommended glove changes, and I think this maybe speaks to some of the preservation conversation. So there's this note about maintaining the low medium residential designation in certain locations. Thing, but from what it sounds like, is with where we already have this low medium housing, we sort of want to just maintain it. And I think maybe it speaks to the conversation we were having before about like incentives. And we had this on Columbia Pike 3.5 years ago when we were looking to maybe change the form-based code, where there was a concern of if we allow more density, we're going to maybe incentivize the current owner to say, great, it's time to cash out. Is that sort of the idea here of like what is maybe either marks or at least close to market rate affordable? We sort of just want to leave as is.
It's a good question because it really depends on the site.
Okay.
I think one of the challenges that we have along Langston is, we don't have regular square blocks or rectangular blocks that are deep and consistent, along the entire 4.5 miles long. You can see by just the shape of those neighborhood areas, right? The lots are irregular. A good portion of the corridor, at least all of area 2 and part of area 3, the lots are very shallow. And there are a million of them, little small lots. So it would require consolidation. So that map is actually pretty helpful because this just shows the marks, at least how it looked along the corridor. It's different today. There are actually more marks today than there were when we did this map, which was the data for 2017. But generally, that's where they are. The areas that you see in purple and in green, one is 60% and the other is 80%. And what it shows is that where they currently are in buildings that some of them have renovated recently. Some of them have very large parking lots, and some of them don't. Some of them are very small little parcels. And so when we looked at each one of these sites, when we say we looked at each one of these sites, we tested to see what could fit without moving the building. And then in some cases where the lots are only, they're half an acre, it just made more sense to say that and it's rebuilt into a building that is maybe 3 or 4 times the height that's currently there. In the case of some of the nonprofit sites, like APA, we know owns a couple of properties along the corridor. One is Lucky Gardens in Area 3, which is a sizable site. It's over an acre that could accommodate significantly more units there, if it got completely redeveloped. Like there is no opportunity on that site to infill, simply because of the way that the site is currently configured. But then you have the property on the east end, basically in Area 5 West, North Highlands, which is Calvert Manor. That site is a postage size type of site. And so when we looked at the opportunities for that site, we said, well, that's a historic resource. It's essential. We want to preserve it. For that to the number of CAFs, it would require consolidation with the properties immediately around it, which includes,
Very small.
very small.
Yep.
And it would require expanding out. So really, just to answer your question, I mean, I think we have to be open to all possibilities, whether it's through infill, renovation, as you said, keeping some of the buildings that are there if they're efficient or making them more efficient.
Awesome. Can I ask one more question? Somewhat related, maybe. So we have this housing conservation district that the county implemented several years back, and then the plan here would basically swap that out for this vision. Can you sort of just walk us through, sort of in practical terms, what that looks like?
Sure. So I don't think on this map we show where the HCD areas are, but we can certainly show that in another time. It's in this. In the low. So, okay, so we can maybe go a little forward, but that is under implementation. The end of the slides, right? Yeah.
Okay, we can hold on to
so
that.
Theoretically, most of the parcels that are within the HCDs will go away because this will supersede that. There are a few that are sort of straggling outside that will have to remain.
Okay, it is 8:30. Let's move on to the next bullet. By the way, we are planning for a second meeting, and so if some other questions come up, we will try to make time for that as well during that meeting.
And how are we doing in timing? So are we?
Well, it's 8:30 and we have to stop at 9:15 for a public comment, where everybody will get 2 minutes.
And we've got public facilities, building forum, which is going to require more conversation, and historic and cultural resources. So maybe we can get through public facilities and the last one kind of quickly and allocate more facilities. So the policies on again, public facilities and schools really focus on adapting for future needs. By monitoring the growth, that will happen along the corridor while examining countywide needs and opportunities. In other words, not just focusing on what Langston Boulevard needs or can provide, but looking at the county as a whole to be able to support the needs. And secondly, to maintain flexibility over time to adapt to that growth and meeting those needs through either, mostly through future capital and long-range public facility planning processes. So one way that the corridor and the county can adapt to growth is by co-locating other public facility needs on existing public sites along the corridor and consolidating recreational facilities and activities wherever that's possible. Another way is to seek partnership opportunities and support special event programming that is hosted by private organizations. So really looking for partnerships with the private sector in some way to provide some of those uses directly on those properties. And then in terms of adapting for future school needs, what the plan recommends is renovating existing APS facilities, the buildings on those sites, or building new facilities on those APS sites. And then lastly, the plan recommends integrating public facilities and public spaces with neighborhood activity hubs, where development is being proposed to be concentrated so that it increases access to those services for that population and surrounding areas. For that, we can.
Okay, any questions on this? Okay. Yes. All right, Eric.
There was a note in here about, I think. I thought there would be other questions. There's a note about consolidating community centers. Would that be here? Can you just walk through that? Like, why is that necessarily a good idea?
Yeah. So as you know, the lease site is no longer a community center. And so in the future, I think one of the things that the plan recognizes is that there will always be a need for a community center on Langston Boulevard. And if it ever got moved, or it would have to come back. Basically, it needs to occur along the corridor. And all we're saying is that there may be possibilities to consolidate uses wherever possible, public uses, different types of public uses, until the various sites that we currently have along the corridor. And so all it's saying is that rather than having two community centers, which is what we had at some point, is maybe consolidating it into one site that is larger, provides more of the services of the community. And that could happen for any other type of public uses.
Just to clarify for my own sake, is that separate from the Lee Arts Center?
Right, so the Lee Arts Center is in the same building where the community center used to exist. So now it's just the Arts Center that is operating out of that facility.
Okay, just to make sure. Yeah. And then I know there's a lot of community desire for there to remain a green space. What is the likelihood for that to happen? What are the thoughts of that, or what's being proposed at this time?
So the scenarios that we've shown in the plan really they're not trying to indicate in any way the sizes of any one of those programs. It was really just a bubble exercise diagram to really, at a very high level, kind of explain the types of uses that could work together. And that's why we mentioned that on the Lee Center site, for example, there could be an opportunity for senior housing. Simply because of the program that's already in place, and it just seemed to work well. But it could be any kind of housing, affordable housing. And I think back to your point about the open space, we were just indicating sort of through those diagrams that we would still want to retain public space on that site as well as on the Langston Brown Community Center site. So in no way are we suggesting that it would be reduced in size, or we don't know at this point what it could look like in the future or what the actual need might be for that type of public space, but we're certainly recognizing that's something that needs to stay.
Yeah, and in fact, to keep the relatively short distance between public spaces that we want to have, it's
yes,
some of that site remain as publicly accessible.
Okay, perfect. But will it remain the same size as it is, or?
So we don't know.
So I think what the plan's trying to get at is that we need to continue to have public land on the corridor, and we have public uses. So I think this plan is also trying to say we also need to be flexible, and we don't know fully how those sites are going to be used. Community center uses in general are needed and can be occurring on those sites, schools and open space, and the potential for co-location of other uses like housing. So I think that the thought is that if the county were to embark on what should we be doing at those sites, let's at least initially look at both sites together and think about, what uses could go on each site and the pros and cons, the constraints, the opportunities, and then that can help us move forward to the next decision-making frame. So at this point, we're not locking anything in on these particular sites, other than just saying we need to continue as the community grows, population increases, we need community center uses, and we do want to be able to retain open space, but we can't afford to just have only open space in those locations.
I think, it's great that you guys are taking the time to really think it through. I do want to mention that it does create a bit of consternation with the current residents, because, you know, uncertainty makes everyone a little bit nervous. So I think, you know, having them more solidified, but as soon as we could get that, that would be great.
Well, any process for determining what those uses or the configuration of those sites will definitely be a public process.
And outside of this process.
And outside of this in the future. Yeah.
Okay, building height and, actually, historical cultural resources.
You want to do that? You want to jump?
You
to
wanted to
that
go to
and
that
then-
because the other one will probably be a lot more.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry.
know what
Kelly,
slide
could we,
number
it's just a few slides forward. A few, because there's all the maps and the design guidelines. So sorry, all of our animation.
Natasha, while you're doing that, let's just point out that the public spaces master plan, that there is a recommendation in that piece of the comprehensive plan to consolidate recreation facilities and activities, so that we have them distributed around the county, but they're consolidated into fewer and larger facilities. So we're trying to be in alignment with that. So thank you, Ryan.
Oh,
Another Ryan.
Delaney.
Okay, here we are,
All right.
historic and cultural resources.
Yeah, so the policies for historic and cultural resources are really focused on honoring the significant resources along the corridor by, one, increasing public understanding and appreciation, which we know this can be done a number of different ways. Some ways include incorporating public art, integrating arts and cultural programming, and celebrating the authors that have contributed to the corridor's history and identity. The plan does encourage both partial and full preservation, as well as site interpretation of those resources, and that and is encouraging that through transfer of development rights, commercial renovation or improvement assistance, which is to the point that we talked about earlier with economic vitality, through bonus density, and through historic easements. So the plan recognizes that many of the significant resources are also in areas where major improvements are needed, and redevelopment offers opportunities to meet other important countywide plan goals. And so it will be important to keep that in mind as we consider what the ultimate designation of a particular resource should be. The fact that we need to balance those countywide needs and the plan goals along with the recommendation for preservation.
I'll just say, I think that this corridor could benefit from a lot more public art, specifically in certain spaces.
Yeah.
But just as a bigger picture item, I know that for planning, we got into a big conversation with Joyce Motors and, you know, historical, cultural resources. And I know that that plan is also, I just think that there's going to need, that we need to have a bigger conversation about how that works here too. I know that some commissioners were feeling unhappy with the way that went down in terms of its historic designation and whether it was properly preserved or not.
And to follow up on that, the day before our next LRPC, this will be the LRPC for the historic preservation update.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that what comes out of that is reflected in this,
Yeah.
especially in the sense of full and partial preservation, because I want to be careful that we're not going to be blocking an update of property and losing housing because something may have been in a too restricted category. So I think that we have to be really careful and take a look at what we're designating here in the various categories, given what comes out of that new update to the plan for preservation.
Yeah.
I think that LRPC meeting is the night after.
Maybe it's like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on September 6th for those
Sixth.
interested.
My mistake. I keep getting those too.
So I think from this plan, the even with the identification of resources, we still have that as an option in terms of preservation, along with change being an option.
Any questions or clarifying points before we move on to the biggest probably topic, building height and form? Okay. Ellie, take us back from whence we came.
There's a lot here to cover. All right, thanks, Kelly. All right, so the policies on building form, as you can see here, focus on achieving context-sensitive building design. The plan, which you've probably seen, includes recommendations for transforming the core area into a more walkable, compact, and well-connected system of blocks and neighborhoods. It focuses the tallest building heights at key activity hubs, at intersections that are important along the corridor within walking distance of the metro and bus stops. It establishes maximum podium heights as well as minimum setbacks and step backs and desired height transitions in each and every one of these neighborhood areas. It also sets parameters for how new buildings should be oriented on the site to create wider streetscapes, locating parking either below grade or above grade, but behind street fronted buildings. The policies also focus on achieving building and site design that fosters a healthy urban environment, enhancing connections to nature, and retrofitting surface parking with landscaping to reduce impervious surfaces. Next slide. All right, so the plan includes a series of building height maps that delineate the different height zones in each of the neighborhood areas. This one that you see here is for Area 3. These maps have evolved, as I said earlier, throughout the planning process, beginning with the land use scenario analysis, which, as I said, was completed in 2021, and followed by the PCP, which was released in August of last year. So you may recall that the PCP last year included an analysis of different sort of densities and building heights that were based on the scenarios in fall of 2021, which had both taller and lower heights. So that analysis was really created to understand the impacts of new development and opportunities for achieving the goals along the corridor. So last summer, we launched an online form to gather feedback on the preliminary concept plan. We had over 500 people respond to that form, plus numerous letters that we received from various organizations, including the Langston Boulevard Alliance, the NAACP, the Chamber, housing advocates, and various commissions and advisory boards. And what the community feedback suggested was two things. One is that Langston Boulevard is critical, and I know we talked about it just a few minutes ago. It's critical to meeting many of the county policies and goals, including the Affordable Housing Master Plan Vision Zero and carbon neutrality. And the second thing that the feedback suggested is that the PCP was just not being bold enough. It wasn't getting us, to achieving those goals. More than half of the respondents did support having additional incentives for private investment and additional height. And so the county was urged to provide incentives for private development and was asked to increase opportunities for providing additional housing supply along the corridor, affordable housing units, additional open spaces, enhanced transit and sustainable development. So after completing that sort of community engagement process, we met for several weeks with the LBA executives, as well as the community forum chair and vice chair who are here, to discuss, where additional opportunities are, for considering additional height along the corridor. And so based on those conversations and really our assessment of the corridor overall, particularly to make sure that we were being consistent in our approach, that we weren't just adding height arbitrarily, but rather strategically and in places where it makes sense. And like we've said before, in areas, near activity hubs, metro, areas accessible to transit, and more importantly, on parcels with sufficient topography and depth to be able to accommodate adequate height transitions, particularly where they're adjacent to low density residential edges. So the ideas and the concepts that we have presented in the PCP were refined into the draft plan that you see now, and these are the maps that came out of that, which proposes, again, additional public spaces and pedestrian and bicycle connections and taller heights in certain locations. So if we go back to the Area 2 map, I'll show you exactly what changed. So this is Area 2. You can click, Kelly. So the spot that changed. She took control.
That leadership.
All right, so in Area 2, what changed from the PCP is we've added additional height at the George Mason intersection. It went basically from 5 stories to up to 6 stories at that intersection. In Area 3, The area that changed was between Glebe Road and Woodstock, just south of Langston Boulevard. And then in Area 5 West, which is North Highlands, we really focused the additional height along I-66 and sort of that area between the parcels along I-66 and Langston. And then lastly, in Area 5 East, which is also North Highlands, the area of change was focused at the Air Force Association site, where we know that there's opportunities for additional height that can happen within the topography. So with that, the plan also includes a number of design guidelines for the built environment, which cover a lot of the points that you see there on the screen. There's a few images on the next slides that we can refer to that are related to the height transitions. And then the next one, to where you locate parking and loading and service areas. So we can refer to that if, as the questions come in.
Wonderful. Any questions?
Clarifying question for area 2.
Yeah.
You said it was increased to 6 stories, but
Yes.
then I see that it's also up to 7 stories. So is there a distinction?
Yeah. So at the node, at the primary intersection, which is Harrison and Langston Boulevard, that's where the dark pink is.
Okay.
That area we always proposed to have up to 7 stories.
Okay.
And that was, for the most part, the community supported it, mainly because there's depth there. There's enough room to transition the heights. At the George Mason intersection, it's only 6 because the parcels are actually much shallower.
Okay.
So there's less room to transition. Yeah.
And less community. Sorry, and less community.
And less community support. Yes, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, this is appropriate time to be raising setbacks, that sort of thing?
Sure.
Okay. As mentioned, we have a lot of 7-story and below along the corridor. There's only a few places where it exists. If I read it right, we are looking at setbacks that would start at 7 and the setbacks be at least 35 feet. The concern I have there, one, is that means for a large part of the corridor, there would be no required setback done by design anyway by a developer who wants that, but it's not required. So you could have just going straight up 7 stories along most of the corridor. Even though I think under other sector plans, the setbacks can start or do start lower than that. 35 feet also seems pretty wide, that given how shallow a lot of our parcels are, that's going to mean effectively you're not going to want to build above the 7th floor. It'd be a single barrel, because for residential, it means a single barrel building. So is this something we should be really looking at differently, or are these setbacks and the height and then something that would be flexible, that it could be required that when it gets to site plan, that no, you really have to make it lower, but you don't have to go 35 feet back. You could start at the 2nd floor, but it's okay to go up to the full 7, but only have a setback of 10 feet or 5 feet. We have some Crystal City projects that the setbacks are really like 5 feet. So
let me start by clarifying one thing. There are setbacks that are different from setbacks. Yes, and yes, there are setbacks that are which are different from setbacks. So I just want to clarify that there are 2 distinct things. And I went back to the report and looked at it and realized that why there may be some confusion, but there are setbacks that have been recommended, and they're based on streets, on street frontages. So when you look at the public realm section of the design guidelines, each one of those streets that we have cross sections for, they have specified setbacks, minimum setbacks. So that podium level of the building, the podium portion of the building, does have to conform to those setbacks. And in some cases, it's 10 feet. In other cases, it's more. It just depends on the width of the right of way and what we're trying to accommodate there, especially when we have bike facilities and so on. But then the setbacks are different. And I was looking at the language, and I think we're going to have to maybe clarify or make some tweaks to make sure that it's crystal clear. But the setbacks were really intended only for tall buildings along Langston Boulevard, barely like in Area 3, where we can look at the map, right? Primarily there, as you can see, where we're proposing the height is on the south side of the road. So any tall buildings could actually loom over. They're pretty close to the low density residential on the north side. They're not, the right of way is also quite narrow. So the buildings, if that portion of the building isn't stepped back sufficiently, it might cast shadows onto that area. So the purpose of the step back, again, is for the portion of the building beyond the 7 stories, and it's really to try to control that space within the right of way. Now, that doesn't mean that the building has to be designed in a wedding cake style. We are effectively trying to create this sort of defined streetscape that is at most 7 stories. The parcels here are pretty deep on the south side, and so there's opportunities for the tower portion of the building to be reoriented in a way that it's away 35 feet away from the bar that is parallel to Langston Boulevard. So we're not trying to say that the building has to step back. Obviously, from a construction standpoint, that doesn't work. So there's flexibility with that. And it's really intended mostly for, like I said, for area 3, where we're trying to, because it's on the south side. I think you had another question. I'm trying to remember what that other part of it.
I think you answered a lot of it.
Okay.
It's just, I wanted to be careful that where it is just 7 stories, that it isn't going to be just a sheer wall going up.
No, there are setbacks for every street frontage that we've identified here on the corridor, and even for new streets.
But once they build to the building, then they could build 7 stories.
Yes,
they could build straight up to 7 stories. And so I think the premise here is when we have some step backs called for maybe in other corridors is when we have taller buildings, towers. We want that to be stepped back so that you still create the base. And in this case, we are looking at the base of.
Well, so let me correct, actually, one thing I probably missaid. So there are step backs for above the 7 story, but if we look at the conditions where you're near low density residential edges, and if you're across the street from one, there is a step back required at the 5th floor. So between the 5th and the 7th, there's like a 10-foot step back. It's where you get to taller buildings in other parts of the corridor, right? Right.
So I think
This is really confusing. So you're
I know.
to get really clear somewhere in defined terms in the, so we understand just what we're going to be getting and what it would mean. And for that matter, property owners know what they can do and can't do, or what their restrictions are going to be that, oh, I can't just build the box like this.
Yeah.
I can't fill that entire block with this. It's going to have carve outs. It's going to have to be back here, back there, whatever. And that may make some of these parcels, unless they're consolidated, undevelopable. At least under what the heights that we're talking about simply can't happen.
Right. Yeah, we'll clarify that in the plan. I think we were trying to, if you look at the maps show very specifically, like, for example, they're on the east side of Woodstock, right? Like across from the school site. The sort of the 10-story portion of the buildings come right up to the street line. We're not showing us sort of a zone that is indicating some kind of step back. But we do for the portion that I just mentioned, west of between Gleben and Woodstock, where we're being intentional there. So I just think we have to clean up the language so that it's crystal clear what matches what with the plan. But in most cases, we're trying to create the space of 5 stories that steps back beyond that, wherever you're near low density residential edges. But if you're inside the sort of the core area and it's an area that gets completely redeveloped and there's no low density residential, then you could potentially come to the build to line.
Elizabeth Guerin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have a question about the 7 stories. We sometimes run into this on PC where developers kind of build to 6 stories because that's the max they can do for stick built. And then above that, they need a different form of construction. So are we making this easy enough to get the 7 stories where we want them?
We certainly did think about this, the way that the construction code works and some of these thresholds. And so that up to 7-story limit is generally the amount you can build. If up to, you can do 5 stories of stick-built construction over top of 2 stories of concrete. So that's why that 7 stories ends up being where it is. It also works well with the way the building code measures that type of construction. So there were several different discussions that happened to set that 7-story magic limit. Construction type being one of them, the scale of development being another, adjacent to various types of construction or existing neighborhood. It's also important to note that that 7 stories along Langston Boulevard, in many cases, the right of way for Langston Boulevard plus those setbacks, 7 stories adjacent to that is quite a nice proportion. It's a similar height to what the width of the right of way plus setbacks would be. So it wouldn't have a canyon-like effect to it. So there were several reasons why the 7-story decision was made. So hopefully I answered your question, but if I didn't, I'm happy to clarify.
Yeah, so, is this suggested height, the developer could still come in with bonus things and get higher than that, or is this capped?
So the maps that we've included in the draft plan, our intent is for that to be the limit, but obviously as site plan projects come in, the county board does have the discretion. An applicant can come in and request something that's different from what the plan is proposing, even higher. That can always happen. And it's ultimately up to the county board.
So,
their discretion.
so also too, what I'm understanding, depending on the location, if there is a residential neighborhood immediately or neighbors immediately abutting, the setbacks and setbacks will be adjusted. So it's not in general. It's adjusted depending on where.
It's not uniform all the way down.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
No.
And that's why the maps show different setbacks in different places. They're very detailed, or they're very tailored to fit the needs of the adjoining neighborhood.
Yeah, because somebody mentioned canyon. I mean, we have a lot of canyons here. I were a neighbor, I'd be a little concerned. 15 stories on a place where I'm like, wait a minute. Funny thing over there, that would be, I have to think about that one. Seems like, and the reason that I'm saying that is in the canyons where we have done the 15 stories or the 20-some stories, we've let them go higher and higher and higher. We're still at the end of the day are short of all the goals that we try to achieve here in the county. So that's a good point.
I think that's why in Area 5, where you have the tallest heights shown, it's one of the reasons, it's a little counterintuitive. You see the highest heights just away from Metro is because they're closest to I-66, where you don't have the imposing nature of those buildings adjacent to small.
The topography drops.
And the topography drops.
So I wanted to share a visual that pictures 1,000 words, right? So this rendering from the plan illustrates and also shows what a step back. This gives you a sense of scale.
And one,
But this doesn't mean this is what it has to look like.
No, it's just an illustration of what's in this.
well, no, and
It's
you know,
for a
it's
photography.
easier
Yeah.
things for the public to digest as well. There was and the PC people remember this, I think, where Elizabeth had sent out a study that showed that buildings that were only 10 stories were far more efficient and, you know, better for the planet and all this other stuff versus the higher the building went. So.
Joan, that's cues you.
That cues you.
Yeah, we haven't looked at, I haven't seen that much in terms of site of buildings. I think certainly look into that.
I find it also, but,
Yeah.
But you had a question. Or
Yeah, I had a kind of, one is actually in terms of building footprints, especially for the hub areas where right now you basically have audio or oriented development, low retail with lots of parking. And, you know, are we kind of setting standards or requirements of, you know, they're going to go up, they're going to get more density to go up, and how much, that's an opportunity to build in some more open space and park space. And I know you've got some of that in there, not really keen on plazas that are mostly concrete or mostly hardscape. It just, in this coming climate, it's not gonna be comfortable at all. But, really thinking in terms of, kind of the density going up and giving that an opportunity to build additional, provide additional space for open space and trees. And it's also an opportunity possibly to, get enough space to really put a good number of trees that border, especially the lower residential areas. So, is kind of part of what we're looking at is actually defining, footprints in ways that gets that extra open spaces in those areas where it's basically impervious surface now. So we, that should be part of what we're looking for is building that extra green space.
Just for everybody whose eyes are going numb from the back and forth, I just want everybody to know that Kelly has the mouse. Everything was fine when I was in control. Any other questions on building height or thoughts on building height and form?
Yeah, I'd actually have another, which actually is getting into the urban heat island. There's talk about some of the green infrastructure of trees and green roofs and green. Other thing, there's also, kind of looking at the designers to design buildings with reflective materials and other, and what the size and form is in terms of, doing that assessment of what the building form is going to do in terms of the island and designing in ways that actually mitigate the island effect. So, kind of how do you get that built in? So we know that developers are coming in and thinking about it because quite frankly, they don't think about sustainability very deeply when they design. So to go even that extra step of starting from the beginning of how they design for the future.
Just a quick thing, Marymount University, I think it was Marymount, put out a study showing that it's 10 degrees hotter in the Ballston corridor than it is just a few blocks away because of
trees, lots of concrete, yeah.
Jim?
When we talk about 7 stories, are we also going to translate that into a maximum number of feet high? Because I could see somebody building a luxury building with 12-foot ceilings, and that would mean something way, way taller than the normal building, even though it's just seven stories.
Yes.
So you will have it translated into maximum.
It's in chapter. It's in, yeah.
Thank you. I missed that.
And so if anybody didn't hear it, Jen just said it's in chapter 4. Caroline, do you have your hand up?
I do. I just have to associate myself with Joan McIntyre's comments, especially the opportunity to find those plannable spaces and that we're going to have to create them because we don't have them there now. So any opportunity we can to get rid of some of that impervious and get rid of the impervious and put it into pervious and more opportunities given the incredibly dearth of tree canopy that we have in this area. So just wanted to go on record with that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this topic before we move into implementation? It doesn't work anymore.
The next one.
She broke it.
Oh, you went back though.
But see what I mean?
There we go.
I missed it.
You missed it. Right there.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, I will cover this information. And so we are still working on our implementation strategies, but within the draft plan.
Kelly, move.
So we touched on this a little bit earlier with one of the questions. We are planning to add a planning district to the general land use plan map for what we would call and refer to as the Langston Boulevard Planning District, and inserting some information into the GLUP booklet, the vision goals and key policies. With that planning guidance, we believe that would be a replacement for what we were showing with the Housing Conservation District for a number of areas along the corridor, and we would be referring, this plan would be referred to for planning guidance for those areas. So we would be removing the HCD boundaries where they overlap with this new district. But there are 2 areas along the corridor that are outside of our our area here. Some of that is in the Hallsdale Highview Park neighborhood, and then some of that is in Area 5 East. So those would remain in place, and we'll continue to, work on what is now no longer called Housing Conservation District Study. It's the Multifamily Reinvestment Study. So when we're able to resume that and bring that process to closure, we'll be confirming how we want to handle those areas on the club moving forward. We are expecting to indicate land use designation changes to effectuate this plan and vision. We're discussing still internally how far to advance those amendments, whether those are proactively on the county board's own motion or incrementally with redevelopment applications. So we'll have some more information to share on those, on that in probably at that future meeting in September. Another aspect of the general land use plan that we've signaled, and that was an outgrowth of the expanding housing options process, was to adjust the Cherrydale planning district to remove several lots that are adjacent to sites that actually did develop under the Cherrydale revitalization plan. And they have, really come into their mixed use development. So we think that since that vision is realized for, again, several lots adjacent that were not consolidated, that we can remove those from the planning district, and that would enable those property owners to have the option to consider EHO development. So that's really just a follow-up from the EHO or missing middle study, if some may know about that. In terms of the transportation plan, we are expecting to add some new areas planned for new streets. That's how it's coined in the MTP map. We've, again, in this plan, we are seeking to expand the street grid in a few locations. And even with some of the larger blocks, we are looking to expand street grid so that we have greater connectivity of all types, multimodal. So one thing that, again, we'll be doing is that's shown in basically a hatch pattern on the map in the MTP map. So we'll likely be bringing that forward when we bring the club amendments forward as well. And then lastly, we are contemplating, what zoning tools would go hand in hand with the GLUP map land use designation changes, but we are trying to consider what existing zoning tools, that we can apply here that offer the site plan mechanism. And to the degree that we can rely on existing tools, we may not need zoning ordinance amendments, but certainly if we do, that may be perhaps, at least for some aspects of that, more adapting zoning changes rather than, constructing a new section, from scratch. There are some aspects of the zoning implementation that may need to be phased. And, it is our hope that we would bring not only the GLUP and the MTP, but any zoning amendments through in a near term. Sitting here tonight, we don't have a definitive time frame for that, and it may need to stagger right behind plan adoption. Right now, we're showing it in that short-term category in the implementation matrix, which is really anywhere from plan adoption out to 3 years, but I don't think that we're going to be out that far. And we certainly know of several property owners who have, signaled over the course of a few years that they have an interest in, moving forward. I think some of those are going to be the larger sites where we indicate, greater levels of change, and again, through the site plan option. So I think that that's where we want to focus our energy. If there is any adjustments to zoning, it would be in that category. But I do think that we've been pretty clear along the way that in some areas where the sites are, just limited in terms of their site size, depth from Langston Boulevard, and that not only is the site constraint, but what the plan is offering is more limiting, meaning we're up to 5 or 6 stories, and that's not as much of an increase above what they can do by right. We're continuing to look at whether the site plan tool is the right tool to apply there. So it may very well be that the site plan is still the option for those areas, but we're continuing to explore a use permit option and whether that's a new unified commercial mixed use development zoning tool. For those of you that know what that is, we're continuing to look at that. And if that's the case, while it's not like a form-based code that is highly prescriptive, with hundreds of regulations for any development site, it is a zoning tool that does have greater level of standards in it than what we see under the site plan zoning district. So if we choose to use that tool, we may need a little bit more time to develop what those standards are. Obviously, pulling as much as we can from the plan and the design guidelines. But we also think that those probably are not the sites that are really ripe for change right away. So again, if there's any phasing of the zoning implementation, we may focus on what we can do for site plan. And then if there's anything else to do on more for these constrained sites, that may have to, come.
Thank you. I have a couple questions, one on the MTP.
Okay, so listen. Really quick.
Virginia Square, for example, has, I think, cross-hatching in one chunk where it doesn't prescribe where the rights of way go, but they should be there when site plans are done. We'd be having a similar approach, for example, in Islands, where we're recommending quite a number of additional rights of way, but there's real questions about where that should go and what would be best. Would we use that approach and say there should be more rights of way through here that will be determined by site plan rather than putting specific lines on the map?
Correct. That's at least what we're talking about with our colleagues in DES, that we have the plan, and the plan speaks to conceptual locations for where those new connections would go. And I think that we want to solidify that with, once we know what the application is, what site is involved in the configuration and the engineering of it. So the MTP would likely be, with that crosshatch, meaning it's in the legend that's saying this is an area that we have planned street expansion.
I mean, I think that's a great idea.
No. Listen, we are at 9:14 right now, and we have promised public comment as well. So I'm sorry, you have 2 more questions. You'll have to email one more, but you'll have to email it. Eric and Nia, you'll have to email your questions as well because you're fine. Okay. We are going to move on to public comment right now. Everybody gets 2 minutes. We'll put the clock up. I don't mean to be rude when we hit the end of the timer, but at that point you'll have to stop speaking. Okay. So we are going to start with our virtual speakers. Thank you for allowing me to move on at this point. Ben Keeney, we're going to start with you. There's 2 minutes on the clock. Please go right ahead. Ben?
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, thanks for having me. No, very exciting. And I'm speaking as the president of the North Highland Civic Association. We have a very diverse neighborhood nestled within Area 5, as I'm sure staff knows this very well now. That's one of our biggest strengths, is the type of diversity of different types of homes and apartment buildings and condos and townhouses that we have. And I think overall the plan helps kind of energize some of these areas. And we see a lot of opportunities in what this could bring. We also have a diverse group of individuals. Some of them are a little bit concerned with adding a lot of density, and some of them support it more than others. I think a couple other groups might be here tonight that also are prepared to speak. I think as a reminder for everybody in our community or others, this is a LPRC, this Long Range Planning Committee meeting. These are supposed to be high level, so I don't think we need to get too far into the weeds. With our diverse feedback, one common consensus that we always tend to hear is people like to support those common sense elements like better pedestrian safety, better intersections, bicycle and traffic safety. We have one of the highest speed bike trails probably maybe in America. It's pretty daggone fast if you go down you know, on the eastern side of Area 5. And I think that's one thing that I think we need to look through as we get into this master planning study in the final stage. Is this a 50-year or a 25-year study? That was one question I had. I also had a technical question about TDRs. Not too long, didn't read, but the TDR process, what could that mean?
Hey, Ben, thanks for your comment.
Thanks.
Please feel free to email staff.
Absolutely.
With your questions,
sure will.
and we will make sure they get answered.
Okay.
John Obenberger.
Hi, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, thank you so much.
Perfect. I think the green Main Street is disingenuous for the plan. This is a statewide arterial, and it covers, it moves traffic throughout Northern Virginia. It's one of the only east-west truck routes in Arlington County. So reducing this to 2 lanes will have adverse impact on safety. Talking to staff and reading the report, there's been no safety analysis of the overall impact of going to 2 lanes versus 3 lanes. So any positive safety implications will be far outweighed with going to 2 lanes versus staying with 3. There's severe congestion projected in the safety in the traffic analysis the staff did. There's no mention of the severe congestion in the report that was released. In fact, there's substantial problems with the analysis that was done and the assumptions. They assume 50% of all trips along Langston Boulevard would use transit. That's not true. That's not applicable. And I also disagree with not identifying the parking needs for the density that's proposed north of Langston Boulevard in Area 5. Based on the height that you've identified and the parking that's needed under current zoning, you can determine how short of parking you are, and it is going to be a chaos. It's not going to be enough parking. There should only be 4 or 5 stories on Langston Boulevard north in Area 5 and back to 3 or 4 stories maximum on the south side of Langston Boulevard. That feedback was provided by the community. It was ignored by the staff. They said community feedback without impact assessment was the reason for making the changes, which is disingenuous.
Thank you, John. Chris J.
Thank you. This is Chris Jones. I just wanted to comment on the retail plan. I actually am one of the owners of the Lime Village Shopping Center, and any vision we have for the future would include a lot of retail. But I think applying retail to a lot of the sites along the corridor is misguided. Primarily because retail is changing so rapidly. Just anybody who knows about Amazon knows how much it's impacted. And that is a lot of the reason for the decline of sort of what we would call the mom and pop stores. They've been the large format retailers and the online retailers have, you know, even Etsy have put a lot of them out of business. So I think you need to be very selective in where you apply that retail if you want vibrant retail to survive. Our site can support it, but that some of these smaller sites, it's also extremely expensive to build mixed use, much more expensive than single use. And a lot of the smaller projects will not be able to support it and will have trouble financing it. So you need to build some flexibility as you impose sort of retail requirements on some of these other sites, because we don't know where it will be in 20 years, and this plan will probably still be in effect. That's all I had.
Thank you very much. Ginger.
Well, thank you, everyone. Most of what I was going to say was already said tonight. Okay. But I just wanted to follow up on and a little bit with Chris was saying about the viability of retail and commercial. And so I think it is really important that we do everything that we can in the plan, and that includes parking to be part of this plan. The heights were raised in the plan in different places, but it wasn't just for housing. It was also sort of for the financial viability of the commercial portion of it. I think it's an important factor when you're considering doing the project that you have a little more, takes a little more money to be able to do the retail properly. So that's just a puzzle that. And then also, I look forward to talking more about the setbacks at another time. And I think it's also important to make sure that there's a lot of flexibility in the plan. A lot of the sites along the corridor are very quirky. So there's going to be different combinations of elevation. And so when we talk about the greenways, everything, that we need to make sure that in the plan itself, and I know this is staff's intention, but the plan for future staff members shows the flexibility, demonstrates it very clearly so future staff understand there should be flexibility. Ralph Johnson's property would be a very good example that there are 2 drawings that show how it can be done differently. And there's a bunch of other stuff, but my time is up.
Thank you. Aaron Roberts.
Oh, sorry, I have the atrocious hand.
It's okay, I was gonna blame you.
Thank you all for your time. Excited to be here. Pleased with the thought. Just like to say at the outset, not a garden variety NIMBY. Actually excited about a lot of what we're doing. Important. I want to talk about 1501 Langston, slide 31, commonly known as the Air Force Association. I want to draw attention to 3 things. First thing is safety. Second thing is livability. Third thing is context sensitive. First on safety. This is one of the most dangerous intersections in all of the county.
Aaron, could you speak up just a little bit? They can't catch you.
This is one of the most dangerous intersections in the county. That's not my opinion. That's according to county data from 2017, 2022, Vision Zero report. And not only is this just antiseptic data I'm citing, 3 members of our community have been horrifically maimed. 1 was killed. 1 was amputated at a nearby intersection. 1 was sent to an emergency room just a handful of months ago. Another died, run over by a bus. These are facts. Second thing, livability. There's almost nothing that people in our community, 129 townhomes, agree on, Zone 5 East. Almost nothing. But a 2/3 supermajority in 1 week that included July the 4th put together signatures for a variety of reasons stating unequivocally that they do not support current draft. I won't bore you with the details, but it's available upon request. Finally, design, context-sensitive design. Out of time, but maybe one of my peers will speak.
Thank you. And we have Bob Pillsbury.
I second basically everything Aaron said. We are a community of townhomes in very close proximity to 1501 Langston. 1 house is 40 feet from their building to the current building, which is not as close to the plot line as allowed by the draft plan. So it's not a question of no height, it's a question of what height makes sense. I actually had a thought when we were talking, and I know of no dystopian future in which low density was celebrated. Just saying. The second point I wanted to make is this is a long-range planning committee. Really appreciate it. Long range. Think back 27 years, if this plan is to go to the 2050, what the transportation system was like. There was no Uber, no bike share, no, what is coming is eVTOLs where you just fly out. Drones were not allowed or invented. So there's a lot of things that maybe should go into the plan, like where are the bike stations going to be, the charging stations for all the e-vehicles. Self-driving cars are a thing now. Autonomous self-driving cars are a thing of the future. So you're parking, you walk out of your car, walk into the store, and your car goes and parks itself somewhere. It doesn't have to be. So those are the things that, as a long-range planning commission, you may want to think about. Is the future, not tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Julie?
you.
Yes, thank you. Julie Pillsbury, other husband, glad to be here. Thank you all for what you're doing. This is all new to me, and a couple words caught my ear this evening. One of them was Green Main Street, and it is a misnomer to consider that where this particular AFA site could ever be a green Main Street because it doesn't have the terrain compatible with it. That terrain starts a mile up the road. Number two, adaptive reuse. There is a brick building that could be converted into homes that could provide affordable housing on site in a beautiful neighborhood that has been sustained and nurtured by the people who live there for 27 years so that it is green and beautiful. We have volunteered, we take care of the public spaces of the Palisades Trail. We clean up in partnership with both the county and the feds, the national parkland. We are the opposite of a gated community because we know, because we walk in our neighborhood, that the people from the high rises across the way cross the dangerous Langston Boulevard, misnomer, to come to us, to walk their dogs, to have their children see nature and enjoy what I believe Langston Boulevard plan is committed to. I think the biggest threat is that 20 years or 25 years from now, you will regret not turning our community into the gateway to the gardens and parks of our county. We have enough concrete. Across the street from my house, which we supported, is the development that someday will create an esplanade and hundreds upon hundreds of new units with, unfortunately, from my point of view, most of the affordable ones off-site, but we publicly testified that we would have preferred them on-site to preserve the diversity in our community. So I'm asking you to have a different vision of the future, one that is beautiful and green, and which you won't regret.
Thank you, everyone. It is 9:29. We have advertised this meeting to go to 9:30. Jim Lintelmi has a question that he's going to be asking staff by email. Nia Bagley also has a question that she's going to be asking staff via email. If any of you have any questions that you'd like to be asking of staff, please do so by email. And we will see you again at our next meeting, which is again tentatively scheduled for September 5th. Thank you guys for a very productive meeting, and we apologize for all of the connection and technical issues that we had. We blame it on the weather.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Wow.
Thank you.
You know, we just want to be able to provide that more specific.
Planning.
Yeah, and I think like, and I, the setback
Area 5.
conversation was like one of our questions. And I did, like, a lot of the street between, you know, the.